I'm sure anyone who has spent a modicum of time on the internet is, at least to some degree, familiar with the social media platform Reddit. With its peculiar interface and myriad of quirky communities that caters to just about any interest, it's no surprise that Reddit has the presence it does. However, as unique as the website is today, it is completely different compared to how it was back when it launched in 2009. See, while Reddit nowadays is more comparable to something like Twitter, Reddit was more like 4chan, with users able to be mostly anonymous, and with the site as a whole having this no-holds-bar, laissez-faire type of attitude when it came to the kind of content that was allowed to be posted. For instance, the infamous r/jailbait. This attitude wasn't just restricted to dirtbag subs though, as the larger subs played host to an array of off-putting content. On July 26, 2012, this would come to manifest in a particularly nefarious way. One of the biggest subreddits on the site, r/askreddit, saw a particular post that, to this day, is not only one of the most infamous on its website, but one that had lasting ramifications both on and off the website for well over a decade. What exactly was that post? Well, it's quite jarring to think that, even with rules being much more relaxed on Reddit back then, no mods immediately took it down. I mean, asking a question like that is frankly a Pandora's box of the worst kind, and we'll examine the fallout of this thread later. For now though, I believe that it's worth looking at some of the stories that users have posted to give you an idea as to the kind of replies that made their way onto the post. Before diving in, however, I want to emphasize that the stories presented in this video are being presented with the intention of informing and educating those that may be interested in a piece of dark history related to Reddit. If this is something you don't want to see, there's no shame in clicking away. Oh, also, I'm sure y'all know this, but I'll say it anyway. I'll not only have to be very conservative with my language here given the subject matter, but I had to clean up some of the language in some of the stories that will be discussed in this video. So anytime the R word comes up, I'll flash this image that you're seeing on screen right now. During my time examining the thread, I found that the stories posted in the replies came in 3 different forms, grouped by how heinous the actual circumstances were. The first kind, and by far the most common type of reply that I found, were posts revolving around miscommunication or misreading signals. Though the thread is littered with this kind of story, I believe this particular account by u/throwaway_shame epitomizes this kind of case. Okay, here it is. It happened when I was maybe 22. I had been visiting a buddy of mine who was living in a basement apartment in a college town. Upstairs lived a single dad and his teenage daughter. The dad worked nights if I recall. So I show up to my buddy's place and we're having a fun day hanging out, pre-drinking before we hit the bars that night. It was summer. The girl from upstairs had a couple friends over. I can't remember how it happened, but me and the girl, she was maybe 17, ended up play wrestling, with me pinning her down. We were all laughing. But when we made eye contact, it was that look we exchanged, the "I dig you" look. I immediately got up and later, me and my buddies went to the bar. That night would have gone like any other. Drinking, dancing, hitting on women. I remember getting back to the house, and my buddy led me into the girl's room. He asked her if I could crash in her room. I was kind of astonished that she said yes. I think that's when, in my drunken mind, I thought that she must have wanted it. I was on one side of the bed, clumsily trying to play footsie with her. She seemed kinda nervous, but at the same time I remember she was saying provocative things. At some point I just said screw it, and climbed up on top of her and tried to kiss her. She tried to squirm away. Now, I remember exactly what I was thinking at the time. This girl gave me the look earlier. She invited me into her bed. What teenage girl would pass up the opportunity to be with a 22-year-old guy? She must want it. I tried again and slid my hands over her body. It was then I looked at her face. She was petrified. I at this point pulled myself together, rolled off her and apologized. My hormones were raging. I asked her why she didn't want to. I told her what I thought above. She started to cry. I got up, apologized again, and went to the couch and spent the night staring at the ceiling thinking I was going to jail. My buddy got up and we went for breakfast. When we got back, one of the girls' friends was there and demanded to speak to me outside. She quietly told me that her friend said that I tried to her. She wanted to hear my side. Since the day before I seemed like such a funny, sweet guy. I told her the story. She looked at me with a look of disgust I'll never forget and said that I may not have been an actual, but I was as close to one as you can get. I wanted to apologize again, but her friend said it was best that I just leave. I got in my car and left right away. That was the lowest I've ever felt in my life. So yeah, quite a doozy of a tale to start off with, but one that illustrates a common situation you'd see when it comes to cases of assault. Ignoring the statutory that took place, this kind of scenario commonly occurs when people go against their better judgment and assume that the other party is open to having relations. Not stopping to see if the other party is actually willing to engage in acts of intimacy is the easiest way for people to breach such a personal boundary. However, unlike cases where we can just say that such a transgression was an honest mistake, this man's story goes a bit deeper than that. Just take note of the poster's phrasing, how he says that his hormones were raging, or that he assumed a 17-year-old girl would jump at the opportunity to get with an adult man. These explanations, or more like excuses, he gives provide a clearer picture for what clouded his judgment. It's not a case where a partner gives a shaky response before becoming intimate. It's a situation where he had a desire to get with this girl and had these reasons come up retrospectively for why he thought it would be a good idea to go further. It's a good example of why it's important to take a step back and make sure that everybody is consenting. At the very least, this poster shows some self-awareness in saying that what he did was abhorrent and wrong, which is far more than what I can say about a good portion of the other posters on this thread. The second type of posting in this thread is similar to the first, only instead of the poster realizing that they made a mistake and stopping, they instead recognize that they are actively trespassing a boundary, opting to finish whatever it was that they started. With these kinds of instances, the encounter begins consensually, but one party then wants to stop, with the other party not respecting those wishes. This next story from you, Shameful Throwaway 765, demonstrates this exact scenario.
I'm a woman. I raped a man. Everything was consensual. We had been seeing each other for a little while and had sex a few times. Things were going great. Now, he had told me before that he didn't feel right finishing in women. He didn't like the idea. His brother had been lied to about a woman being on the pill, and now had a child he was not old enough or stable enough to raise. So the guy I was dating always wanted to pull out and cut, even though I had given him proof that I was on the pill. I thought this was fair. We always did what he wanted with that. I completely ignored this request of his one time. Worse, I ignored it completely at the time. I was on top of him, consensual as I said. I got really, really into it. So did he. Normally, when he was close to finishing, he'd ask me to slow down, and I would, so he could pull out and cut somewhere else of his choice, or he would pull me off if there was no time to speak. This time, however, I was being really aggressive and forceful. He liked that, as in a sexual act, domination. He had told me this before. He loved women being aggressive in bed, and he was definitely loving it now. I took it too far. So I was speeding up. I heard him say, "Oh, no, please, I'm going to finish, slow down, no." That was a proper no. I knew he liked being dominated, but we hadn't discussed safe words yet. No still meant no. It very much meant no. I knew it meant no. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. In case anyone brings this up, no, he didn't try to pull me off, but that means nothing. Nothing. He'd said no. I should have gotten off. The force at which I had been going means it wouldn't have been easy, even though I'm quite small. The guy was close to an organizing himself to pull me off would have been near impossible. I'll try to tell you what I was going through in my head, but this is good. He's playing with me. He likes being dominated. So hot. At that moment in time, I felt great. I ignore him outright. That's all. It's not that I forgot he didn't want to finish inside me. It's not that I didn't hear no. There, in the heat of the moment, I just assumed he was into it. At that moment in time, I really believed my own justifications. I told myself he was enjoying it. Really, screw his no. Finish inside me. That's hot. That changed the moment he had and I had gotten off of him. It hit me the moment I was sitting on the bed. What did I just do? I looked at him. He was looking bewildered. I had no idea what to say or what to do. I managed to blurt out are you okay? He looked at me, put on the saddest fake smile I've ever seen, looked down, and said, please just keep taking that pill. I cracked then. I ran to the bathroom. I thought I was going to throw up. I was disgusted at myself. I knew his wishes. He had said no, and I'd ignored it. When someone says no, you get off or stop right there, and then I didn't. When I came back, he looked at me with shock and asked me if I was okay. I sat down on the bed, quite far from him. I didn't think he'd want to even be near me, and he pulled me closer. That's when I realized he didn't even know he had just been raped. I didn't point this out to him. I never have. We're still together. We stayed together. I feel disgust every day for what I did. It's always in my mind. He has started to come inside me of his own accord even. We had more of a talk about our opinions on pregnancy, or if an accident happens. He trusts me more when it comes to that. And he honestly can. But at the time, he didn't trust me. He didn't know he could. He had limitations. I completely ignored them, and I had raped him. And him being a man, and me being a woman, he didn't even realize it. He stuffed down how awful he felt. He must have convinced himself that I did nothing wrong, but I did. He said no. I hope someone, even just one person, reads this. I want someone to read this confession. Thank you for reading.
Without a doubt, this was definitely a lot darker than You Threw Away Shame story. Both start out similarly enough. We have someone who was so engrossed in how they themselves felt, they failed to see how the other party was feeling, or if they even consented at all. The way this story differs is the perpetrator hears pleas from their partner but chooses to deliberately ignore what they are saying, focusing on finishing what they started. But what really makes this story quite unnerving was that the poster showed that she knew what consent fully entailed, and that no meant no, yet was so caught up in her own desires that she disregarded such a fundamental rule when it came to having relations. But we could see her building these justifications in her head, to a point where she outright said screw his no. Not only did she just ignore her partner's no's, but also acknowledging that her partner was uncomfortable with finishing inside of her, yet insisted that he does so anyway. There's no mincing words here. She straight up him. But her story deals with someone who, like Mr. You Threw Away Shame, is cognizant and remorseful of what they did. Both his and her stories involve people who, above all else, did not set out to deliberately someone. They did not see themselves taking on such a role. But what if we come across someone who sets out to commit this kind of crime against multiple people deliberately? See, while the prior story is a horrific depiction of assault, it wasn't something that was maliciously premeditated. That, however, will be shown clearly in our next story, which represents the third and most disturbing kind of story that is featured on this post. Buckle in. Throw away for obvious reasons, and not a story of backing out like the others in this thread. This is probably not going to surface to the top, being as I'm coming to this thread late in the game, but I'm a post-college age male who, several girls through the use of coercion, alcohol, and other tactics over a course of 3 years. First off, I must say, I was at a dark and horrible place in my life that I've since grown from. I'm ashamed of the person I was. If the people who I'm close to now knew who I was, I would be ruined. I'm known for being a great guy, friendly and easy to get along with, a community and political activist, a fervent volunteer in the community, and a person who rises through the ranks quickly due to successes at work. That was my mask, and I was good at it. So good that maybe I convinced myself along the line that was who I could really be, and that may have helped me change and stop doing what I did. I'm somewhat remorseful for what I did to those girls, but I don't think I could ever face them to apologize. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I had this certain insatiable thirst that brought me to do what I did. I didn't know how to stop, and just when I thought maybe I could, I'd find myself back in my pattern, back on the hunt. I'm a good-looking guy, and I can get girls pretty easily. I'm currently married to a beautiful woman that I met during this time in my life. Not someone but someone who knew my mask during this time. So, anyway, after a while it became boring to go after the sorority girls that would easily throw their after you. I wanted the thrill of the chase, and that's what led me to forcing myself on girls. I would find attractive girls that were self-conscious about their looks, girls who were pretty in their own unique way, but not the outgoing sort, mostly introverts and girls that didn't party or do wild things. Hopefully a girl who was a bit damaged, had an ex-boyfriend, or family issues, came from a small shut-in town, that sort of thing. So, when I showed interest in them, they'd be completely enamored. They'd almost be shocked that a popular, good-looking, and well-liked guy would be talking to them. I'd have that initial meeting at the library, a coffee shop, a work function, or a party where I had them convinced of what a great guy I was. I listened to them, made them feel special, like they were princesses. Sometimes we sort of hook up that night, kissing, making out, never anything more. The next day, I'd call and see when they wanted to get together again. I'd find some excuse for not going out somewhere but having them come over late at night. It was college, and not a lot of people had transportation off campus, so it was typical for people to come over and watch a movie or something on a date. They would come over, and I'd always make sure it was real cold in the room, cold enough so that when we started watching the movie, I'd say something about being chilly and grab a big fleece blanket for the both of us. We get kinda close, and then maybe ignore the movie for some kissing. After a while, we'd talk some more, and I'd start edging my hands around the understrap of the bra, or maybe a bit into her pants, just kinda playing on the edge to gauge her response. Some girls would stiffen up a little. That's when you knew they didn't like what was going on. We were in my studio apartment, so the bed served as the couch, and it was easy to start sliding down throughout the movie, so we'd be laying down. It was then I could turn around and get on top of her. The girls usually didn't know how to respond, some of them were into it, and those nights were usually consensual and boring sex, sometimes followed up by a few more nightly visits before getting the boot. However, the great nights were the ones who squirmed, who didn't want to give in. I'd have to shush them down and try to work on them slowly enough so they didn't know what was going on until it was pretty much already happening. I'm a muscular guy, over 6 foot and around 200 pounds, and most of these girls may have been 125 to 130, really tiny and easy to pin down. To be honest, even remembering it now, the squirming always made it better. They didn't want it to happen, but they couldn't do anything about it. Most girls don't say no either. They think you're a good guy and should pick up on the hints. They don't want to have to say no and admit to themselves what's happening. Alcohol helped. Having a few drinks during the movie or doing a few jello shots that were prepared for a party that weekend would usually do the trick. The aftermath was always different. Some girls left after about 15 minutes, some girls would stay until the morning and then leave. A few tried to call back, maybe blaming themselves for what happened or something. I never worried too much about being caught. Everyone knew me, and I worked with the police a lot, with administrators and campus officials. I was on first-name basis with the chancellor and the president of student affairs, so if anything came down to a he said, she said, I figured I'd be in the clear. Having her come over to my place made it seem less predatory, as she came into my dorm and could leave at any time. Are you done vomiting yet? No? Don't worry. You can come back when you're done. It's stories like this one that really showcase how dangerously irresponsible it is to have a thread like this in the first place. I mean, not only does it help validate people who have done similar actions, but this guy explicitly explains how he went about preying on vulnerable women. I'll ignore how this sounds like something that Dennis Reynolds from Always Sunny would have written, and assume that this case is real, since there is a lot to discuss here. Similar to how YouTubers apologize, this guy tries to minimize his actions by saying that he was in a dark place at the time. But that's just an excuse, and in no way should be used to deflect accountability. We see, clear as day, how he intentionally sought and forced relations in a methodical manner, a stark contrast from the more crime and passion kind of stories we previously covered. Additionally, this story showcases just how powerful social niceties can be, as the narrator painstakingly showed how those he got intimate with felt pressure to just go along with the lead. In true predator fashion, he took advantage of them when they were at their weakest, such as when they were drunk. Furthermore, he specifically sought those who may have not received much affection or positive attention before. This is actually a common technique used by manipulators and groomers called love bombing. For those who may have never heard the term before, it is essentially a way to try to get someone's favor by showing them a copious amount of affection and positive attention, and is often cited as a part of the cycle of abuse among psychologists. Above all else, what was bone-chilling about this story was how normal this guy appeared to those around him. There was nothing that was obvious to someone who had no reason to suspect that there would be anything amiss with them. It is that appearance of normalcy that is something that predators such as him try to convey to minimize how threatening they may appear, thus allowing them more opportunities to strike. Nobody would assume that he would be the type to be turned on by someone struggling against his increasingly aggressive advances. It likely doesn't come as much of a surprise that people who read this thread actually notified the police about this individual after reading it. From what I found, nothing really came of this, but if anyone does happen to have any potential updates, please share that in the comments. I'd really like to know. So, we have gone in depth as to why this thread was an unresponsible disaster that may embolden predators. Understandably, there was a sheer amount of outrage expressed towards this thread. Many people and other subs decried how giving such degeneracy a platform will chip away at some of the heavy stigma behind S offenders. Honestly, what may be the most damaging aspect of this post for the public at large is that the story submitted reopened and poured a copious amount of salt upon the wounds of people hurt by these kinds of acts. Take, for instance, this Reddit post from psychologist Dr. Rob Tarswell, a regular guest on the Caustic Soda podcast. I'd like to start a discussion about the rape thread, which I see as a serious danger. In a nutshell, rape is a crime which sometimes hinges directly on feelings of power over the victim. That power often loses its meaning if the victim is unconscious. Many rapists typically need a victim who knows they are being victimized. The victim is the rapist's audience. This is crucial. The audience gives the rapist pleasure, euphoric delight from unfettered witness suffering. That euphoria is intense and is possibly driven by the same neurobiology involved in a drug high. Now, when Reddit invites rapists to retell their stories, they offer an audience of thousands. The possibility that individuals reading these stories will be horrified afresh is very appealing to some rapists. Neurobiologically very much like anticipating drug use. Note, the audience doesn't actually need to be horrified. In the mind of the rapist, the possibility of horrifying an audience is what is appealing. Ever wonder what makes addicts keep using? A major factor is the craving that comes from recalling the feelings associated with the pleasurable activity or drug. Cocaine addicts, active or in recovery, who are asked to think about using cocaine have measurable brain changes precisely when they report cravings. We haven't actually measured this in rape, but we suspect it's highly analogous. Thus, the Reddit forum is very possibly triggering cravings in rape. Given how taboo of a subject this is, hearing from the perspective of perpetrators is very rare. Usually when it comes to discussions about settings such as college campuses get the most attention, which can narrow our scope of knowledge when it comes to this topic. As such, this thread actually receives some attention from the scientific community, if perhaps as a means of insight into how we may be able to prevent these kinds of incidents going forward. A study from the University of Georgia, published back in 2017 in the journal Psychology of Violence, examined this thread even further. The findings in this paper are quite alarming, especially looking at other figures that they cite throughout the journal article. With the stated purpose of determining the most salient features for a perp's stated reasons for why they would commit such an act, Hip et al. First describes the CDC's definition of sexual violence as attempted or completed sexual acts committed against someone without their freely given consent, including penetration, forced penetration, intentional sexual touching, or unwanted non-contact sexual acts. For selecting the comments that they wanted to analyze, the researchers included only first-generation responses, the first responses in a thread, from the first 2 days after the initial question was posted. This was done in order to reduce any popularity bias that may have pushed more provocative and unique cases to the forefront after the thread was published. Using other exclusionary criteria such as disregarding comments from a victimization perspective, the research team funneled down their initial sample of 1,128 comments to just 68. After funneling these comments and having a team of trained researchers analyze them, they found a shocking and troubling set of ideas inherent within these topics. Let's go through these one by one. Sexual scripts are guides or rules that individuals use to navigate intimate situations. With these scripts, there are baked-in narratives or implications that individuals may apply while navigating such a situation. For instance, seeing a man as one who has the higher sex drive as a pursuer versus a woman who, as the one with the smaller sex drive, is supposed to put up resistance and push away from the man's advances before saying yes. These scripts often foster the very dangerous train of thought that leads into the whole no means yes idea, and makes a perpetrator feel justified when acting without express consent. This is called the denial of resistance. What might also make the idea of unilateral consent not obvious for a lot of people who commented in the thread is also due to how sexual scripts can vary from country to country, with more sexually dimorphic nations having scripts that place less emphasis on uniform consent. Victim blaming was a particularly insidious trend that was a commonality amongst the analyzed comments. Respondents often blamed their victims for drinking too much, not saying no clearly or loudly enough, and not physically resisting their advances. A clear example from the thread was outlined in the study, as seen here. It was as much my responsibility to ensure good communication as it was hers. Was it sexual assault though? If the phone hadn't rung at that moment, would it have been she, albeit non-verbally, implicitly consented to something she felt she had no choice but to consent to? She was wrong and she did have a choice. But if she didn't realize that in the moment, then what difference does it make? Victim blaming simultaneously causes victims of post-traumatic assault to hold themselves culpable for something done to them against their will and helps normalize sexual violence. Additionally, victims received a greater share of blame if they and the respondent had sexual contact in the past, often using their increased sexual expression as a way to defer blame onto them. Hostile sexism was another trait shared amongst some of the respondents. The article cites a couple of examples from stories that I thought were too graphic to be presented, so brace yourselves. One example that was cited was from a particularly vile user who posted about how he was livid after an unconscious girl that he assaulted, and mind you, he assaulted to the point where she was limping after the incident, vomited after finding out what happened. He said that the chick was being very distant, almost like she knew what went down. She apologized for puking and told everyone she didn't remember anything after the bar. The roommate pointed out how weird she was acting and how uncomfortable she looked. I think she knew exactly what had gone down. She kept it a secret from our group for whatever reason. Good on her. I would have flat out denied it. Anytime we mentioned that night again, I'd just be like, fucking girl puked in my room. This is really saying something, especially with all the other stories that I discussed. But Jesus, that guy, a disgusting sack of crap. I hope he actually landed in the slimer for that one, because someone like that has no business ever seeing anything but the concrete walls of a penitentiary. And if that wasn't bad enough, one other user admitted to his wife in her anus 20 years before posting and repeating that practice once every year since then. She doesn't mention it after, ever, even if I joke that I enjoyed her. I liked the experience, so I repeat it every year. Every year I treat her worse and worse in between. But I very much love her. She doesn't seem like the inner emotions match what I physically want. This is far beyond hostile sexism, but objectification too. The way he talks about how he treats his wife is akin to how Sid from Toy Story treated his toys, as just an object at the mercy of his own whims. Of course, other respondents in the thread also showcase a bit of objectification as well. A lot of them placing numerical rankings on the attractiveness of their sexual partners, or going farther and just straight up admitting that they saw women as their own personal box. One other major theme found throughout these stories was biological essentialism. This principle had respondents try to discuss intercourse as something that was purely biological and that they lacked control over their urges. They essentially appealed to nature when trying to rationalize their behavior after the fact. Examples of this principle in action are when respondents say statements like, "My hormones were going crazy," and etc. These kinds of statements are made in the first place in order to deflect responsibility as much as possible. This can be seen by one poster who said, "I was extremely horny, so I ignored her and did it. She realized what was happening and tried to clamp her legs shut, but it was too late, and I was much stronger than her." The poster also said that an erected has no conscience. That was said in the first place to try to explain how he could do something so horrible, and that it was against his own control to try to stop himself from going through with such an act. Overall, all these themes are closely tied together to paint a particular state of mind that a large percentage of these respondents shared when committing the acts that they did. The objectification and hostile sexism often stemmed from the perpetrators trying to make any sex that they had as impersonal as possible, only viewing the act through the lens of personal gratification. Victim blaming also played an equal part with the objectification. As previously mentioned, it was employed as a way to try to deflect responsibility from the perpetrator as a means of justifying their actions. It appears that the MO for most of these scumbags involved giving in to their impulses and then trying to make some excuse after the fact. Of course, as is the case with research of this kind, it is important to consider how there are plenty of limitations that could impact the validity of these findings. There was no real opportunity to delve deeper into the posts or see if there may have been additional context that could have provided a clearer picture of the events the post portrayed. Also, how candid the responses were is another matter to consider. But given how a lot of comments express remorse over the actions that they took and taking on responsibility for what they have done, it does point to a lot of these responses being truthful to some extent. Reddit as a platform is no stranger to its share of disturbing and utterly depraved postings. However, to see something like this take place, a post that encouraged open and honest discussion of acts that work to deprive people of their own bodily autonomy, and in some cases their innocence, is something that seems almost unimaginable. All I can say is that I hope Reddit's greater community has come to its senses after making such a colossal mistake, and that if the stories presented teach us anything, it is that it is absolutely vital to understand that consent is of the utmost importance, and that trespassing against one's consent can cause an immense amount of pain and misery to everyone involved. Thank you so much to everyone who made it to the end. Blah, I feel like I need to take a shower after this. It feels a bit strange to ask if you liked the video, but if you did get something out of it, don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up. I'll try to be more consistent with uploading going forward, but currently I'm in the middle of a huge move and that's been throwing a wrench in my productivity right now. That's why you should subscribe and enable notifications to stay up to date with my shenanigans. Also, comment on any cases or stories you'd like to see covered next. Now then, do take care, y'all.